Hey everybody, Anthony and Bob Barker are back again, and this time we're going to be making a custom display stand for this samurai helmet. So let's get into the build. So after discussing the design with the supervisor, we decided we were going to go with something that had like an Asian influence to it, and given that the piece that's going to be on it is a Japanese samurai helmet that actually my grandfather got back in maybe the 60s or 70s in Japan, I figured I wanted to try to do some hand joinery because it just felt so much more appropriate for this. So I started off by getting this 8/4 walnut ripped down to size, and it was definitely difficult to do, is maxing out the capabilities of my equipment. But the idea here is we want to have the walnut in contrast with some bird's eye maple, and then that's going to be highlighted even more so with some through tenon joints that we're going to be doing by hand. And here's another example of something that I'm maxing out the capabilities with. My dust collection still does not keep up with my jointer, but that is a problem I will be fixing soon. Now, given that I'm going to be doing a lot of hand joinery on this, I was extra careful with this milling process because I wanted it to be as perfect as I could get it, and that will really help out on making the mortise and tenons much easier for me to do. So now that I have the walnut all milled up, we can get ready to start making the legs of this table. So before we go any further, I wanted to break it down into smaller sizes just to make this a little bit more manageable. And then we'll be getting 2 legs out of each one of those blocks that I'm cutting out with the chop saw there. So with that, we have them at the rough size that we need. So we're going to rip it down to the exact width there on the table saw. And then we'll get it to the exact length here on my crosscut sled. Now I am going to be shaping these later, but I'm leaving them square for now just because that's going to make it easier for when I'm chiseling out the mortises. Now I mentioned before that I always like to challenge myself and add new skills to my woodworking. Although sometimes I kind of make things hard on myself. Now this is my first time doing the hand joinery, and my first mortise that I'm doing is through 3 inches of walnut, which was a little bit challenging. So I use this extra block here just to kind of help guide my chisel to make sure I'm going straight down. And I started on doing a little bit more than half of the mortise on one side, then I flipped it over to the other side. Then after that, we just kind of used our other chisels just to kind of clean up those edges, and we get all the way through. Now the other part that I wanted to do was to make sure that I didn't have any lumps inside of there, so I just used my square there to see if there's any high points, and then once you see those, I just went with my chisels and just kind of got those down, and then that got a nice clean mortise. Now, after we got those prepared, it's time to start making the apron, and I wanted to get the mortise done first because I'm going to be doing the through tenons really to the size of that joint, just in case I didn't get it perfectly to the size that I wanted. So we got those cut down, and my initial plan was to do this by hand, which you can see me struggling for a couple reasons. One is I really need to get some kind of vise just to hold it still, but also I'm just really new at this and it just wasn't working. And then it turns out my saw is not even big enough to do as big of a cut as I needed, just because, like I said, it's going through 3 inches of walnut, and I want to have a good amount of it exposed on the other side. So I ended up just cutting the shoulders here with my crosscut sled just to get a nice, good, clean edge, because that's the most important part there. And so my backup plan here is just cutting these long tenons with my table saw. And at this moment, I was a little flustered and I moved a little too quickly, and I actually did cut into the shoulder, which you'll see later when I have to fix that. But this did pretty well to get it mainly cut, but it couldn't go all the way because, of course, the saw is round. But just to fix that, I just grabbed my pull saw there, and I just used that to cut off the rest of those the edges of the tenons. And of course, since we already had the shoulders cut, it just popped right off when it got to there. But that did leave some rough edges there. Now this would be a lot easier to fix with a router plane, but I don't have one of those yet. So I just got to my chisels and just kind of slowly worked it until we got all of that nice and flat. Now, after double checking the width that I need, I just did the same process just to finish up these tenons. And of course, I added my blue tape there just to make sure I wasn't going too far. I didn't cut into the shoulders anymore. Then after some cleanup work, we can actually test up the legs, and you can see how far it needed to go and why those tenons needed to be so long there. Now there's still a lot of shaping to do on both of these pieces, but overall, like for my first through mortise and tenons, I'm pretty darn happy with how it came out. I think it's going to be working really nicely. So the next step is preparing the rest of these front aprons. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be having 3 supports, and I plan to have them come through the front and the back apron for another through tenon joint. So for these ones, I just use a Fortuner bit just to hog out most of that material. And then I got distracted because I kept on seeing where I cut into the shoulder, and I decided, let me just fix this before I move on because it's just bugging the heck out of me. So I just ripped down like a little strip of the maple here to the exact size. And that did take me a few different tries, but through the magic of internet videos, we'll just pretend I did it on the first one. Then I just grabbed my pull saw and just cut off a little wedge of it, and then we can glue that and then get it inserted into the defect there. And once that's dried up, I just use the saw and the chisels to clean it up. And then once that was fully done, it was a very nice repair, although if you look close enough, you'll be able to see it, but I don't think anybody other than me is ever really going to notice that. So with that part fixed, I can get back to making these mortises here. And I did most of it with the mortising chisels, but I also just used my regular chisels for part of it. And we just did a little at a time, squaring it off and then working my way to the edges just to try to keep those as clean as possible, because this joint will be seen very prominently on the front of the end piece. And then coming through this is going to be more of the walnut, so we're continuing with the contrast there. And these are the support pieces, so we ripped those down to nice long squares. Well, I guess that would probably make it a rectangle, but we ripped those down to size, then chopped them on the chop saw, and then we're going to go ahead and mark out for the tenons on this as well. So I was really careful to mark everything in place because I was determined to try again. And you can see it was kind of straight, but there was just so much vibration in when I was trying to saw it that it just wasn't working. So I reverted back again to doing it on my table saw. I think what I'm probably going to end up doing is just doing a tabletop Moxon vise or something like that, so I can do this in the future. Although at some point I may just need to integrate a dedicated vise into my workbench itself. So for this one, we just basically just cut all of it with one go there. Now my hand looks close, but that's just more an optical illusion on how the camera angle and everything. It was pretty darn far. So we got everything except for a little bit in the corner, so we just use a chisel to clean that up, and then you can see that those tenons are pretty much ready to go. So now the last part is some supports that's going to go in between the legs, and this was my 3rd attempt and finally a successful attempt at doing a hand tenon. We were able to get these ones, and these are much smaller than the other ones we were doing because this is not going to be a through tenon. And of course, before I did that, I did put the mortises into the legs to make sure it's sized right. So then we have our jig here. It's a tapering jig. We just rearranged it and got it to size so we can put a nice long taper on those legs. And then for the top, I wanted just a little bit of an angle, so we chopped that off so it kind of points up and inward. And then we're going to be doing a similar angle on the sides of these aprons on the through tenon portion of it, just to give a little bit more detail and design to it. So with that done, we can get on to the final shaping. And for this, we're just doing just a very small round over. I wanted to keep it a little bit more blocky, just because I felt it worked better for this particular piece. So we did use a 1/16 inch round over on all of the pieces except for the part right there. I just did a 45-degree chamfer on the through tenons because it just felt like that would work a little bit better on the design for that particular part. And then the last thing to put together is just a small platform for the top that's going to sit on top of those supports. And it didn't need to be as thick as the legs were, so instead of using that 8/4 walnut, I just used some scrap 4/4 walnut that I had left over from a prior project, and I just got 3 pieces, kind of got them just roughly big enough to make the size of panel that we needed. Use some dominoes just for alignment to make it a little bit easier, and then went ahead with the glue up. Now, my original design, I was actually going to be routing in a groove on this platform to put like a plexiglass case over it. But once I got to here, it just felt like just being open was going to be the more clean, nicer look. So we kind of called an audible and just stuck with that. And for this platform, it's not going to be connected to the front or back apron. It's almost going to be like a floating segment just sitting on the supports. The one main thing that I did have to keep in mind is going to be wood movement for it. So for the supports, we're going to end up screwing it in, but we're going to end up doing it in a way to make sure there's a little bit of room for movement. So first we just use the Forstner bit, and then after we do the Forstner bit, we come through, which is a oversized drill bit, and go all the way through. So that way we can secure it with screws, but the hole's big enough, as you see there, where the screw can kind of move enough to account for any movement that we have there. So then we go on to the glue up, and I decided to do this in a few sections just because I figured it was a little bit easier on me. And less stressful to do it that way. So we're going ahead and doing this piece first, and definitely was a tight fit. It took me all of my clamps just to be able to lock it into place, but the nice thing is, you know, it's never going to move after that. So then we can do the supports between the front and back legs. So we can get those tenons into the mortises there and just throw some clamps. And then after I did that, I just checked with my square to make sure everything remained square and even and didn't have any twisting or movement in it. And once all of that was done, we can move into gluing the platform to the legs. And so I started off just putting the glue on these tenons just enough so it won't be coming through on the other side. And then we can start inserting those into the legs. And then for here, we're just pounding it in because it is a pretty tight fit. But right about here, I realized I had the legs completely backwards. And I'm so thankful that I noticed it now because it would have never come off if I would have let that glue dry. So I scrambled to get that knocked off, twisted it back around, and then get it inserted into the proper orientation. And given how long it took me to do those big mortise joints and make all the tenons and get all this ready, I am so glad I figured that out before it dried up. So once we finally finished, the supervisor came and gave me some words of encouragement. And then we could let that dry and then get the finish on, which we're just going to be doing some Rubio monocoat. We're just using pure here. Put a little bit on the platform and the legs, and like I typically do, I do 2 coats on the walnut. For the maple, it only really needs 1 coat. You won't notice much of a difference, a second coat on that. So then after that dries up, we can go ahead and just finally attach the top platform. So we're just measuring the gaps between all edges and making sure that fits well. And so I'm just going to screw through the middle straight into the platform, and then just insert the screws in all those, and it'll be fully attached. Then all that was left was just to add some furniture feet on the bottom, and it was done. So in the end, this is actually one of my favorite projects that I've built so far. I learned so much, and I feel like it's another step forward in my woodworking skills and designing. My entire goal was to make something that felt like it was meant to go with the samurai helmet, and I think we accomplished that. But Bob Barker and I would love to hear what you guys think about the build, so leave us a comment, and we'll see you guys in the next one.